But what do we have left once we abandon the lie?
Ranks.
A gaping pit waiting to swallow us all.
Ranks.
Isn't a pit.
Ranks.
This is a ladder.
What is going on? How you doing? My name is Jeremy Schulman, at FF_Rebel over on Twitter. We obviously have a special guest here with us who we'll get to in just a second. But today we are doing a startup dynasty mock draft, Superflex tight end premium. And we're going to add a little wrinkle into it by making Pat and myself kind of spin the wheel and figure out a strategy beforehand, which you really should never do. But we're going to do it here anyway and risk things. We need to introduce a little chaos into the dynasty streets in March. So today we have Pat Fitzmaurice, the fantasy sellsword himself, with us today on the program. Pat of the Blackwater, how are you doing today, sir? Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm doing well, Jeremy. Thank you. Exciting time of year, getting ready for the draft, dipping our toe into free agency too, which has, not a really impactful free agency period this year. I feel like for running backs and wide receivers, certainly not for running backs like it was last year, but still it's leading to some interesting changes. And like even these signings on the offensive line matter to us from a fantasy perspective. So it's fun to, discern all these moves as they come across and, all the while trying to bone up on our rookies and get ready for the big event on the calendar this spring, the NFL draft. So.
Yeah, absolutely looking forward to it. I think we have about 6 weeks up until that point, so it is rapidly approaching. I definitely am looking forward to that. But of course, we can't just talk about rookies and do rookie drafts all the way up. As much as we would love to, we have to figure out where these rookies belong, at least at this point. So we can try and find value in the dynasty street. So I think startup mocks every once in a while here with the rookies involved is super interesting. And we're going to have to try and figure out exactly where these guys fall. But to your point, Pat, you mentioned free agency. Do you have, for fantasy purposes, there weren't too many guys who landed. Devontae Adams with the Rams, Sam Darnold or Justin Fields, pick your flavor of fourth tier quarterback. Who do you think is the most interesting for fantasy purposes in terms of free agency over the last couple of days?
I mean, Adams that's a good place to start, Jeremy. I think that was the Rams were a pretty good landing spot for him, I think. And sort of, I think he'll fit McVay's system pretty nicely. And I do think his skill set can sort of complement what Puka Nacua brings to the table. And just having him work with this veteran quarterback, I think that is a good way to prop up Devontae's fantasy value for at least one more year. And then just, I know there have not been a lot of splash signings at running back and wide receiver and tight end. Certainly the quarterback movement has been interesting, but then you see things like, the Texans. I really wanted to buy back into CJ Stroud and the Texans passing game this year. Nico without a little less target competition for him, maybe, and could certainly have maybe justified him being a first round pick, assuming that the Texans improved their offensive line, which was just awful last year. And not only have they not made any real significant signings, I know they signed, I think, Laken Tomlinson, who, just kind of a lateral move from Kenyon Green, who they just traded to the Eagles. But the one good guy they had on that offensive line, and I know he was guilty of a lot of false start penalties last year, Laramie Tunsil, though, still a stud offensive lineman. So the offensive line is actually getting worse, which I didn't think was possible. And they haven't really added anything, and they're drafting near the bottom of the first round. So I don't know if there's an impact lineman they can add where they're drafting from. So I don't think I'm going to be in on CJ Stroud this year after all. I don't think Nico Collins maybe warrants a first round pick, and I don't want any part of Joe Mixon either, to be totally honest. So it was an offense I was eager to get back in on, and right now that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. They should be the value, right? But we see also the fact that Tank Dell completely out of the picture. Stephon Diggs, who knows if he comes back or is replaced by a good veteran wide receiver. We got Christian Kirk in the fold, but we have a lot of young guys who could step up, and Mechie and Hutchinson. So we'll have to see what they do. But yeah, I agree with you. It's not looking good for CJ Stroud. So it could be a mess. Quick point though on your Devontae Adams discussion. We know how good he is. We saw him eat into Garrett Wilson, in at least half of the games there with his best friend Aaron Rodgers throwing him the football. What are you thinking about Puka Nakua's value? Are you bumping him down a little bit because of Adams' addition?
As of now, not really substantial. I haven't moved him. Maybe that's the wrong move. Maybe I should drop him. And for me, he was sort of just a tick below. Well, actually, I have to reassess where I'm going to have him in relationship to the former the second year LSU guys, Malik
Mhm.
Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr. I think I had
Yeah.
Puka ahead of both of those guys. I might have to drop him below those two.
Yep.
I have to think about that more, but as of now, I mean, the fact that they really haven't done anything else, that they've sort of re-upped with Tutu Atwell, making it look like he's going to be the third receiver, which, if it's only Devontae and Puka sharing the load and they combine for a pretty massive share,
Yeah.
massive target share, maybe you could still justify Puka as a first round pick and as like the wide receiver 4 or whatever
Yeah.
behind that big 3 of Chase, Jefferson, and Lamb. So, but yeah, I still think he fits in as a late first round wide receiver, but
Sure.
yeah, I'm not terribly worried about what Devontae is going to do to him.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And I mean, I think we're lockstep. I had Puka at 4 today, just before this show to update my rankings. I did move him below Neighbors, Brian Thomas, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So he's currently sitting at 7, which I think is fine. But look, if you're going to say I want, Puka over Amon-Ra, fine. If you want Puka over Brian Thomas, fine. We see what he can do. Adams isn't exactly a spring chicken, so I think we're going to be okay with Puka Nacua for years to come. Just before we begin here, we'll check in first. Jamie says hi, and he gives you the fire emoji, Pat. Rightfully so. We appreciate Jamie on this show. And then quickly, a matter of advertisement here. You see the schedule that we've had in March. We have your coworker and friend Derek Brown on the show next Wednesday at the same time. And then we have Kevin Coleman. And there's all their Twitter handles if you want to check those guys out, if you don't know them already, which I'm sure you do. March 26th, again, another Wednesday at 1 p.m. So we have a pretty full schedule in March. We've got more guys coming on in April, and we are mock drafting all off season long. So please join us for those. We appreciate you continuing to come back. Pat, should we spin the wheel?
Let's do it, Jeremy.
All right. Question for you. Do you want to go first or second? This is always the most important question of the show. Do you prefer to defer, or are you going to take the ball here?
I'll defer.
Yep. All right. Well, here we go. This would be my choice here. We'll spin the wonderful wheel. Pickerwheel.com, not a sponsor. A robust or bully build for myself. But of course, Pat, I don't get to decide. We got a fun little celebration. I may be able to decide if it lands on it, but we're going to see my bully situation and then bully wide receiver.
Ooh.
Interesting. So the way that we're defining this, as the confetti flies again, the way that we're defining this is 3 of my first 5 picks at will have to be at the wide receiver position. So we'll call it a bully build. Certainly, it's not a zero build. It doesn't have to be a hero build, but we could go that way as well if we want to go hero running back, for example. But lots of different options here for myself. Bully wide receiver in a dynasty startup draft, Pat, probably the way that many people are going these days anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of lean that way myself in a lot of my Superflex startups, Jeremy. Like, I'll figure out running back later, and I do not want to be light at wide receiver coming out of a dynasty startup.
100%. Shall we seal your fate here?
Yes, sir.
Let's do it. All right. Oh, okay. We're going late round. So let's see what that looks like. Um, so no picks at the given position. This is either going to be, of course, quarterback or tight end. No picks at quarterback or tight end until at least round 9. Pat, we only have a 10-round draft. So we'll see. Whatever lands closer here to quarterback or tight end will be your late round, and it lands on tight end perfectly. We couldn't have set it up better. Late round tight end in a dynasty startup, Pat, we're probably not leaning this way these days, right? We kind of want those top couple of guys, but there's a whole glut of tight ends in the middle who you probably don't want to mess with. So if you miss out on those top guys, you're probably waiting to do a late round tight end strategy anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, there goes my Brock Bowers at all cost strategy, but that's okay. We'll make up for it, and hopefully you guys will leave Chigakonkwo for me in the late rounds.
Excellent. Yeah, actually, while I set this up, and we'll get the draft fired up in just a second, Chigakonkwo, are there any other names that you're considering late, just in kind of your early offseason, like potentially a Cole Kmet? How you feeling about a Jake Ferguson? Like, what are you thinking about kind of some of these later guys outside of Chig?
Yeah, Cole Kmet's a good one. Just a guy who was maybe sort of marginalized last year by the wide receiver firepower the Bears had, coupled with the fact that Caleb Williams took a while to sort of get untracked and maybe never really did fully as a quarterback. So now enter Ben Johnson, who, we saw make Sam Laporta a very impactful player in his rookie year. And like, I think Cole Kmet is good. He's better than the numbers he put up last year. So I absolutely believe he is an interesting dynasty target.
Yeah. And we'll see. I mean, I don't know what they're going to be able to do. I do know that Roma Dunze is my get at all cost guy this offseason. Unfortunately, he's not flying under the radar so much with Ben Johnson and all the offensive line additions that they have over there. But, one thing that is interesting, and we'll get started here in just a second, but they have to add to that running back room in Chicago, you would think, especially with all the offensive linemen. But if they don't, I mean, Ben Johnson maybe all of a sudden likes DeAndre Swift. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be interesting because Ben Johnson's first season as the Lions offensive coordinator was DeAndre Swift's last season as a Lions running back. So you have to figure that maybe Ben Johnson was part of the decision-making process to sort of throw Swift overboard. But, we'll see. Like what happens to Swift if they do, in fact, get one of the top 5, top 7 running backs, and how do they feel about Roschon Johnson, and does Swift suddenly become a third wheel? So, like Swift is a guy whose dynasty value is going to change one way or the other substantially based on what happens in the draft.
For sure. Totally agree. But, if they get, I'm trying to remember where the Bears are in the first round. Do you have that number? 10th. Oh, yeah. So we're not thinking Genty will fall, but it's possible. That would be so crazy. But, maybe a Travion Henderson drops in the second round, or maybe you get like a Judkins or Caleb Johnson, one of these guys. I mean, even one of these top backs in such a loaded class would be super interesting for the Bears.
Yeah, for sure. With the running back value the Lions have churned out, and with all the upgrades the Bears have made to their offensive line in free agency. I mean, I know they were like bottom 3 in all the metrics as far as inside runs last year. And now that they have totally revamped the inside of their offensive line, they're probably going to fare a little better in that area.
Yeah. And especially with the defense kind of improving a little bit, at least the assumption in terms of everybody they're going to bring in, and everybody who's going to want to continue to play in Chicago, all these ancillary pieces who are still available in free agency. And depending on what they do in the draft, the Bears could be and should be probably a very different team at this point, in the next couple of months here.
I hate to concede it. I'm a Packers fan living in the Chicago area, Jeremy.
Yeah.
So, it's hard for me to give the Bears any credit, but unless Caleb Williams just doesn't pan out, like that is the one thing that could really short circuit this team. But otherwise they look like they could quickly turn into a legit playoff team. Hard as that is for me to say.
Yeah, and now that Sam Darnold's out of town, every one of these teams is a legitimate contender in the NFC North. But that being said, let's jump on into this draft. We are doing once again a Superflex tight end premium draft PPR. Of course, the premium is kind of your standard 1.5 premium here. The way that we've set up, just kind of for everyone's knowledge, just added more flex spots here, just simply so that we can kind of adjust on the fly. I think you can readily assume 2 running backs, 2 to 3 wide receivers here, but Superflex, of course, being the most important. So we'll go 10 rounds. We got 12 teams here. And Pat, you are on the clock in the Superflex mock. So the 101, are you going chalk or are you going the new chalk? We got a couple of names at the top of the board here. What are you looking at?
I am going new chalk with Jaden Daniels. And yeah, I mean, I know different people are going to order the big 3 quarterbacks different ways. Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. I'm going to go with the youngest guy. And I know he has the 1-year track record, and that will dissuade some people from putting him at the top of that grouping, but I prefer to have the younger guy. So yeah.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And of course, Deebo Samuel coming into the fold to run all of the Rondale Moore routes in the Cliff Kingsbury offense. It's going to be a very, very good season for Jaden Daniels. I don't think there's a way it can't be. And they continue to build the offense around him. They brought was it them who brought in Tunsil, who they got an O-lineman in the free agency season?
Washington. Yeah. Yes, Tunsil.
Yeah, so it's going to be looking really good here for Jaden Daniels. So as we look at the board here, we have Daniels off at 1, who hard to argue that given his age and how good he looked. We got Lamar at 2, again, hyper mobile, ridiculous running efficiency, and ridiculous passing efficiency quarterbacks here at the top. And then Jamar Chase. How are you feeling, number 1, about Josh Allen still being on the board? And number 2, where you think position players belong in the first round in a Superflex startup?
Yeah, pretty wild that to see Josh Allen still around at that point in the draft. I personally, let's see, in my overall Superflex rankings for Dynasty, I have Jamar Chase behind. I have him 8th, and I think you can make the case as early as 5th or 6th for him.
Sure.
So, yeah, there's no quarterback or no position player I would even consider ahead of Daniels, Allen, Lamar Jackson, or Joe Burrow.
Yeah.
And for me personally, I would put Hurts, Drake May, and Patrick Mahomes ahead of Chase for Dynasty too.
I love it. I don't know if you definitely can't see it. I need to work on my setup here, Pat, but this is a Patriots, little light fixture here. I'm a big Patriots fan, of course. Love Drake May and what he showed in his first season. I'm just a little concerned about, his longevity in terms of, we saw this with Mac Jones a few years ago where it was not a good situation for him. But things happened to a point for Mac Jones where he just kind of never got going. Drake May now dealing with turnover again in his second year. Still really no weapons around him. I have Bo Nix ahead of him in Dynasty. I don't love it, but he's still a top 10 option for me. How are you feeling about Drake May second year and beyond? It sounds like you're high on him.
I'm all in, Jeremy. I think he's very much the real deal. And if you look at his fantasy points per game last year was 13 point something, but that also included his partial appearances in games. If you look at games that he played beginning to end, it was closer to 17 points a game. And he did that with just an abominable supporting cast, horrible offensive line, and one of the worst pass catching groups in football. And now they're going to presumably fortify that offensive line in the draft. Since they've kind of worked on everything else in free agency, I think they're going to really hammer offensive line in the draft. I'd be shocked if the number 4 overall pick in the draft wasn't Will Campbell of LSU at this point. And it's going to be a better pass catching group too. Yeah. I would expect them to add in the draft there also. Like those are going to be the 2 areas of focus. I just think it gets better and better for him. And he's an aggressive runner. That's the thing about his game that's really sort of underappreciated, how aggressively he likes to run.
Sure.
So that's going to add to his value, and like live arm. I just think the dude's
Yep.
a gamer, and
He is.
I would love to have him on more of my dynasty teams than just one.
Listen, I love to hear it. Totally agree with you. So I'm not going to sit here and say a bad word about it. But yeah, Drake May look great, and can't wait to build around him. Let's just hope the build actually happens. So we've completed the first round here. As you can see, I'll make my pick so I can talk about it, and then I'll talk about my strategy here. But we saw Daniels, Jackson, Chase, Burrow, Allen, Justin Jefferson at the 106, Jalen Hurts, Super Bowl champion at the 107, CeeDee Lamb 108. So we got the pretty much consensus top three guys off the board at the wide receiver position. Mahomes at the 109, a little bit spicy, depending what you believe about his weapon situation, the way he's fallen off the last few years. Steve Spagnuolo and what he's doing with that defense and kind of keeping games tight in the running game that Andy Reid is employing. Patrick Mahomes as the sixth quarterback off the board, a little spicy. We got Bowers at the 110, might be a value at this point. Caleb Williams 111 and Malik Neighbors 112. So before I go into my strategy here, Pat, Patrick Mahomes, Caleb Williams in the first round. How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, I'm still tentatively a believer in Caleb Williams.
Yes.
Maybe I'm just tapping the brakes slightly after last year. He is just like, I've got him behind Bo Nix now, and I would rather have Drake May based on what we saw last year. So I've kind of felt obligated to move him a little bit below those guys, but I do appreciate what the Bears are trying to do for him in terms of the offensive line. It's just,
very true.
They're allowing him to play in structure. Whether he wants to do that, we're going to see, because it seems like he's almost more comfortable like vacating the pocket and trying to do something on the run. But clearly, I don't think that's the way Ben Johnson wants to play.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. Look, it's going to depend a lot. We just talked about DeAndre Swift. It's going to depend what they do in the draft at running back. If they bring in one of these top end guys, maybe we see a little bit more running game. But if they don't, or they bring in kind of a smaller guy as a pass catcher, maybe they're all in on Caleb Williams. I mean, the offensive linemen that they brought in, it sure seems that they want to give Caleb as much time as possible to process, to progress, to work to Roma Dunze after DJ Moore is after he figures out he's covered. So that's the case. Pat, I'll let you pick here. And as you do, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas for myself off the board. Superflex at the end of a Superflex draft in the, at the turn, I kind of want a quarterback, but I have the bully wide receiver strategy that we're working with. Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, you cannot get two better wide receivers at this stage in the game, as young as they are, as good as they looked last year. You see all of the other names that came off the board. Of course, you have the top running backs. And you see Ashton Genty, Nico Collins, who you mentioned you were concerned about. But we see you, Pat. Drake May sniped from you. So you take Bo Nix instead, and then Drake London.
Yeah, May almost made it to me. I was really encouraged by how Nix played. Obviously, like, I was not high on Nix at all, and seeing him play as well as he did, it did seem like he really fit Sean Payton, what Payton likes to do. Like, that is turned out to be a really good match. I do worry that Nix is maybe pretty close to like the maximum output for him. But it just shows. I mean, I consider Nix sort of the lesson that we've learned from seeing Brock Purdy and Bo Nix succeed so quickly in the NFL. When you make a lot of starts in a power conference in college football, maybe the transition is a little bit easier to the NFL, because Brock Purdy and Bo Nix, I mean, Nix, who was a first rounder, and Purdy was the Mr. Irrelevant. Kind of remarkable that both guys were able to hit the ground running the way they were. So, and then Drake London, just a guy I feel a lot better about now with Michael Penix instead of, the washed up Kirk Cousins as his quarterback. It seemed like London was really starting to flourish as soon as they made Penix the starter. So I do think maybe there is another level to reach for Drake May for Drake London that we haven't quite seen yet. So I'm looking for him to have the best season of his young career in 2025.
Yep, I love it. He's my wide receiver 9 currently in Dynasty. It feels a little rich at the same time. I'm just rolling with it. We got Garrett Wilson below him at the moment, simply because Justin Fields, he's not a kingmaker. He can do it, but we'll see if Garrett Wilson can put together that DJ Moore type season with Justin Fields this year. But yeah, I love the Drake London call, and Bo Nix. I have him above Drake May, but just one spot at QB9. I think he's a great value there at the end of the second round. If you have a look here at the second round, we'll recap it quickly. Brian Thomas, Bijan Gibbs, St. Brown, Puka Nacua, Trey McBride, tight end premium. So that's a value for McBride, in my opinion. Ashton Genty in the middle of the second round, something that you should consider before the actual NFL draft. We expect him to go top 15, certainly top 20 in the NFL draft. And I think that's being conservative. So Ashton Genty fits right there as the RB3. Stroud maybe a little bit on the high side, but for all the reasons we mentioned at the top of the show. But certainly CJ Stroud proved in year one that he can really sling the rock. Houston just needs to do a better job of putting things around him. And then Nico, Herbert, May, and Bo Nix. In the third round, we got London, Marvin Harrison, Kyler Murray, Saquon Barkley, AJ Brown, Breece Hall, Lab McConkey, Love, Garrett Wilson, and Jackson Smith and Jigba Pat. Anything that you've seen here which you think, that guy's a really nice value, or that guy went a little bit earlier than I expected?
JSN was a really nice value at 310. Especially like I don't want to go overboard in projecting JSN for 200 targets with DK Metcalf out of Seattle, but suddenly they are building that wide receiver group around him after he came in and sort of had to wait his turn behind Metcalf and Lockett. So I don't know if anything has totally shocked me, Jeremy. Like maybe Trey McBride was a little bit early for my tastes in a dynasty startup. I don't know, this touchdown allergy with him, I think might be real.
Yeah.
It dates back to his days at Colorado State when he had like over 1,000 yards in his final season there and didn't score he scored his one touchdown of that season in his final college game. So I like McBride, but I do think there is kind of a big gap between Bowers and McBride. As far like Bowers, I think it's just the sky is the limit. And, McBride, I think he can continue to do what he's been doing. But I just don't know if there's another level for him. And I would not have taken him ahead of Ashton Genty, put it that way.
That's fair.
Or Nico.
And of course, yep. And of course, with Kyler Murray, as his quarterback for at least another year, I think that whole offense is allergic to touchdowns, as you referenced. Geno Smith should be an upgrade for Brock Bowers, who was absolutely phenomenal this past year. So I was sniped by Bucky Irving. I thought that was a great value for Bucky there. He looks great. That offense looks great. But I'm sitting here in a Superflex draft in the fourth round without a quarterback, and there's one guy who I'm willing to take, and that guy's Baker Mayfield, Bucky Irving's teammate in the backfield there. Just looked phenomenal. He's a value in terms of his contract and what they were able to sign him to. He got the Sam Darnold deal a year earlier than Sam Darnold, and he's just proven to be a much better player. Chris Godwin back in the fold. So Olave, the metrics look great on Olave. Hopefully he stays healthy. And Baker Mayfield, I'm happy with this build so far.
Yeah, and Baker, I think, is just turned 30 or will turn 30 shortly before the season. So,
yep.
Yeah, the only issue is like this guy's lost his offensive gurus 2 years running. First Dave Canales and then Liam Cohen. But like he was really adaptable with the switch from Canales to Cohen. Hopefully he can continue to show some resilience and just kind of amazing. Like I do expect a step back. He never before had 30 touchdown passes in a season, throws for 41 last year. But I mean, I think he's proven how solid a starter he is now. So even if there's a step back, I don't think it's going to be a major step back.
Yep. I would tend to agree with you. Plus, that defense isn't getting any better at the moment. They seem to be losing a few pieces here in free agency. I mean, this is the thing, Pat, right? We all want teams with great offenses. We want players on great offenses. We want Cincinnati Bengals fantasy players. We want Detroit Lions fantasy players. But there's something to be said for the team with a serviceable offense to good offense with a terrible defense. And I think, we saw this with Cincinnati last year come to fruition, where Jamar Chase is the wide receiver one. Joe Burrow goes absolutely nuclear. Washington, even though they, played above, I think, their means, Dan Quinn was able to whip them into shape and become a decent defense. But you see these guys go off on a good offense and a bad defense. So there is something to be said for that in Dynasty as well.
Yes, definitely. The bad defense thing can be a very underrated component in selecting a quarterback, because the worst defense like that thrusts you into shootout game script. So yeah, that's a key thing to look at sometimes.
If we are looking at the board here, we'll just quickly go through the third and fourth round as you make your selections. So we got to Garrett Wilson and JSN at the back of the third with Bucky, and I went with Olave and Mayfield. Then you have Rome Odunze, who I was considering with my pick. Great pick there. Achane, Laporta, Rashi Rice. We'll see how he comes back from injury, suspension, whatever happens with him. Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, which is kind of where he belongs now. Kyron Williams, Brock Purdy, T. Higgins, and Amarian Hampton, our second rookie, it looks like, off the board. So an interesting cast of characters here, Pat. And now it's your turn at the 412.
Yeah, this is an interesting cast of characters. I am going to, oh man, I feel like I've, all right. So I generally do not favor this approach, but there's a quarterback I love, and I can't believe he's fallen to me this far. So I'm actually going to take a third quarterback.
Love it.
Firing out Michael Penix, and the defense will rest at quarterback for a while after that, because that's where the value is right now. I'm not loving the value at the other positions. Man, just scrolling down the board. Where do I want to go here? I really wanted to take Amarian Hampton. This guy sitting at number 2 is not being kind to me. So I'm going to go with Tet McMillan here. We'll see. Like I could see a world where he is just sort of an okay X receiver and not a superstar. I don't know if he's another Mike Evans or not, but yeah, like his prospect cred is pretty valid, I think.
Yeah, a big guy as well. I think he's 6'4", 6'5". Certainly able to go up and get those jump balls. And he's got the route running ability that you love to see for a wide receiver. So whether the NFL has truly fallen in love with Matthew Golden or not, Tet should be a first rounder, maybe, at that 33, 34 at the very beginning of the second round, if for some reason he falls slightly. But yeah, Tet is an absolute beast. And he could be a target for Bo Nix. That would be really interesting if you were able to stack two young quarterbacks and young wide receivers here on the turn.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see where he goes, because I've seen him in the top 10 and I've seen him slide into the 20s. So the possibility that he is not the first wide receiver off the board is pretty interesting, but I've seen that in a few mocks from some really smart people who have Matthew Golden going earlier.
Yeah. Pretty crazy. And, I think the last couple of years it's been really, we've been scared off of these John Ross types because they run a fast 40, but Xavier Worthy was more of a wide, full on capable wide receiver than John Ross ever was. Matthew Golden appears to be that as well. So I'm not going to be scared of the guy who runs the fastest 40 just because he can run. If he's a wide receiver and can play the position as well, and the NFL likes him, I'm going to draft.
Yeah, Golden has real skills. He is not a John Ross, Philip Dorsett type. He can actually play.
Yeah, love it. We have a couple questions here in the chat, Pat, for us. So, Mike, our guy with the FFU and Dynasty Dogs, tell me to take all the wide receivers. Don't worry, Mike, I did. Jamie says, thoughts out on a third round reversal, specifically in the Superflex, and some of the chat kind of chimed in here, would be the most fair way to do things in a startup. Of course, the third round reversal means that for myself, if I'm picking at the 12, then I am going all the way. I get the 112, the 2-1, and the 301. It kind of runs all the way back to the background to that round. And the idea is that the value at the beginning of your draft is so high with the top players that it really tends to balance out in terms of EV or however else you want to measure it. Pat, what are your thoughts on third round reversal? Do you like it? Is it something that you don't think matters too much? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I'll probably disappoint some of the people in the chat. It seems like we have a lot of third round reversal disciples there, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty ambivalent about it, to be totally honest with you, Jeremy. Like, just as long as I know going in, so I can form my strategy. But I know a lot of people think that's the fair way to go. I don't disagree, but I'm also not aggrieved if we do not have a third round reversal in a startup draft.
Fair enough, and I agree. I think it really just comes down to the skill of the drafter, and skill doesn't necessarily mean picking the best player. It means figuring out your build early and figuring out how how the board falls. Now, for example, we talked a little bit earlier, Pat, about look, we chose our draft strategies at the beginning of this draft, so you know that you're not picking a tight end, for example. I know that I wanted to go wide receiver heavy, but in a draft, right, we're not necessarily kind of sticking to this mindset stubbornly. We're kind of adapting and changing based on how the board falls. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So with that in mind, the board fell to me and Chase Brown fell to me at the 5-12. We'll see what Cincinnati does in the draft. But with who was the other day? Samaje Perine back in town and really nobody else. Chase Brown is set up to absolutely smash again in Cincinnati on one of the best offenses in the league with still a terrible defense. I'm all in on Chase Brown. How are you feeling about it?
Love it. Yeah, I was like to consider myself an early Chase Brown adapter. Like, I live up in Big Ten country, Jeremy, and watching what he did for Illinois in his final season when he averaged something like 30 touches a game for them. Like, I knew
Sure.
he could actually be a featured back if the Bengals ever wanted to give him that chance. And he only had Zach Moss standing in his way. And I don't think a whole lot of Zach Moss. So I was very in on Chase Brown in redraft last year, and I'm mad at myself for not having him in more dynasty leagues.
Yeah, we were a little more Zach Moss at the beginning of the process, but certainly came around. Just the reports from Chase Brown, best shape of his life, doing all sorts of crazy things, training, and obviously we saw that take hold. So you wanted the guy in that Cincy backfield, and Chase Brown was that guy. I went with Kenneth Walker as well. I don't typically like to take two running backs this early, especially one with an injury history like Kenneth Walker has. However, I think that offense with Clint Kubiak is set to run wild, especially with nobody left to throw to on the team. And Sam Darnold back there, Mike McDonald most likely wants a shutdown defense as much as he can build that as soon as possible. I expect we see that heavily in this upcoming draft. And then certainly, I think he wants to control the ball. Sam Darnold, I think, to me, speaks to that idea. And if he's controlling the ball, I think he's controlling it with Kenneth Walker.
Yeah. I just hope they improve that offensive line in the draft more. Like that, another team that was having major issues in the interior of their offensive line, but have not made the sort of moves that other teams with weak middles have made so far. The Bears, the Vikings. So yeah, hopefully Seattle gets on that in the draft because I like Kenneth Walker too. He does tend to be a boomer bust runner,
For sure.
kind of a pseudo Barry Sanders type who either hits the big one or loses 3 yards. But Walker is remarkably talented. Back when he came into the league, a lot of people liked him as much or more than Breece Hall, and with good reason. The dude's really talented. So getting him there, I think, in a startup is pretty good value.
Yep, I agree. And again, I am concerned about my running back situation because I'm relying on them. And I don't have a second quarterback, whereas, Pat, you have 3. But all the quarterbacks flying off the board now. Bryce Young, who I was considering, we have a rookie or two who's hanging out down there, but quarterback is getting pretty thin in a super flex. You don't have that problem here. So what are you thinking you're going to do here at the 6-7 turn?
I guarantee I'm going to go wide receiver, Jeremy.
Okay.
We are close to a ledge with a talent drop off, and I want to get another pair of wide receivers before we hit that drop off.
I love it. As we await your pick here, we can look at the 5th round. Cam Ward, rookie quarterback number 1. We'll see if that comes to fruition. It should at the 502. Then we had Tyreek Hill, James Cook, J.J. McCarthy, Xavier Worthy, Jared Goff, Trevor Lawrence, who's fallen very far and could have a chance to rebound. We'll see if Duval can do anything in year 1 of Liam Cohen's tenure. Devonta Smith, who's a great wide receiver, but stuck behind A.J. Brown, Dak Prescott, Josh Jacobs, and then Chase Brown. You see the 7th round here, or sorry, the 6th round here. And Pat, you're on the board. First, it was Jordan Addison.
Yeah. So I'm taking 2 kind of second fiddle wide receivers here with Jordan Addison and Jalen Waddle, but both remarkably talented. Addison, I don't care that Justin Jefferson is there and that they're breaking in a new quarterback. The guy is just so good. I'm going to bet on the talent with Jordan Addison and not sweat the surroundings too much, because I think his talent is going to shine through wherever he is. And Jalen Waddle, a guy who I think since 2000, I want to say he leads like all college wide receivers in yards per route run. Got drafted number 6 overall by the Dolphins. Started with 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons to begin his career. I know he's coming off the rough season, but obviously part of that was that the Dolphins were completely shipwrecked at quarterback after Tua had his concussion and missed a month. So, yeah, I mean, I still think Jalen Waddle is really, really talented. And obviously his stock is sort of at low ebb after a bad season, but I think there were mitigating circumstances for the bad season.
Yep, I agree. And we saw what he was able to do in his first year in the league. The number 6, I believe, overall pick in his draft class.
Yep.
I mean, Jalen Waddle is an absolute stud. You see it on the field. If Miami can get it together, before their head coach, Mike, there's so many Mike head coaches now. I can't remember. Is this McDaniels? Are we there?
Yes, Mike McDaniel.
McDaniels. Yeah. Okay, Mike McDaniel. Yeah, McDonald, McDaniel. There's a lot of Mikes. But Mike McDaniel here with Jalen Waddle. If he can get it together, and McDaniel can end up keeping his job, I think Jalen Waddle obviously outlasts Tyreek Hill. But like you mentioned, there's a lot of factors at play there. There's the factor that Devon Achane has been so dominant, that Tua has been so injured, and we'll have to see if it can all gel for Jalen Waddle to succeed. But that value is insane. If you look in the 6th round, we have at the 602, Terry McLaurin, Bryce Young, DJ Moore, Chuba Hubbard. Love that pick there, especially with Jonathan Brooks on the shelf all season long upcoming. Travion Henderson at the 606, Derrick Henry, nice value on the King, TJ Hawkinson, George Kittle, Flowers, Burden, and Addison. And then, of course, you went Waddle, Judkins, Mark Andrews, George Pickens, and DK Metcalf teammates now going back to back. Anthony Richardson, Tyler Warren, Emeka Egbuka, and Travis Hunter. A lot of interesting picks here. Pat, you got one here that caught your eye in the 6th or 7th round?
Oh, it was fun to see Pickens and DK Metcalf go back to back. Have you decided which of those 2 you prefer for fantasy, Jeremy? I mean, Pickens is kind of a hard nut to crack. Really talented, really mercurial, and some would say immature. And I feel like DK Metcalf is better than he showed last year. So that's an interesting one to me. Do you have a preference there?
It's got to be DK for me. I just think we have the track record, and like you said, maybe slightly less of a hothead, it's only slightly, than George Pickens. But if we're reading the tea leaves, we might find out here in a matter of minutes or hours if Aaron Rodgers will be the quarterback in Pittsburgh. So if that's the case, I mean, we got a lot of different strange personalities melding together. I'm just going to take the guy who's been in the league longer and assume that Rodgers, or Russ, of course, with the history he has with DK Metcalf, I'm going with DK Metcalf. And George Pickens, I don't know if he's shipped out of town completely. I've heard some of that discussion, but I think George Pickens is going to be more of a boom bust guy, and DK can get there a little more often on some consistency.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Rodgers thing, man. Mike Tomlin has always run a pretty tight ship in Pittsburgh, although he's had some interesting personalities at the wide receiver position. But
Oh yeah.
having the cocktail of George Pickens, DK Metcalf, and Aaron Rodgers would certainly test Mike Tomlin's ability to maintain control over the locker room.
It definitely would. Here I am going with Chris Godwin. I know he's got the injury. I'm not sure what's going to go on with him this season, if he's going to come back right away, if he's going to take a little bit of time to ramp up in season. But I just think it's too good. It also helps me stack him with Baker Mayfield. I love the opportunity to stack if it falls to me. And I think Chris Godwin should be there. Looks like he's going to be there potentially for the rest of his career, as Mike Evans, as good as he's been, is fading a little bit. And then for my second pick, I'm debating here between a second quarterback, Shadeur. We got Sam Darnold. We got Geno Smith, who's probably the guy that I would pick. But I'm going to go ahead and pick my favorite rookie tight end, Colston Loveland. I really think that he's going to fall to the Jim Harbaugh range with the Chargers, who I think are 23-ish in the draft in the first round. And I just think they're not going to be able to pass up on Colston Loveland. They need that in Los Angeles. Now, of course, the Denver Broncos could steal him away. But the Broncos, I think, are also talking to Ingram. I don't think that is anything has been settled there at the tight end position in Denver, unless I am wrong. But the Broncos at 21, could they take Loveland? Who knows? But I think wherever he goes in the first round. He's utilized heavily in year one.
Yeah, Loveland is terrific. I don't think it's entirely. I wouldn't be shocked if Colston Loveland went ahead of Tyler Warren, because he is 2 years younger. And I know Warren had the dazzling stats from last year, and he was great on the field too, no question about it. But he was a fifth-year senior, and he did not put up a dazzling statistical season until he was a fifth-year season. Whereas Colston Loveland, the numbers don't pop quite as much, but 2 years ago he was on a very run-heavy team that won the national championship and didn't need to throw a lot. And last year, the Michigan quarterback situation was just absolute garbage. So that sort of artificially tamped down Colston Loveland's numbers. I think the dude's a baller, and the fact that he's still just 20 years old is going to be real appealing, I think, for a lot of NFL teams. And just realizing this guy hasn't even come close to reaching his potential value.
Yeah. Totally agree with you. And we'll see what shakes out there at tight end. That will be interesting. But I think do we agree 2 tight ends in the first round? Are we thinking that's a lock at this point?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone else gets. I don't think Arroyo or Fannin gets into the first round, and I don't think there's any chance either Warren or Loveland doesn't go in the first round.
Yeah, I would tend to agree as well. If we look at the 7th round, we'll start at the 702 with Judkins, Andrews, Pickens, Metcalf. We talked about those guys. At the 707, Tyler Warren, so our first rookie tight end off the board. And Emeka Egbuka at 708, Travis Hunter. Brandon Ayuk at the 710. Will he be a 49er? Who knows? Tua Tagovailoa, 711. And then I went with Godwin and Loveland. And then as Pat picks here, we got Kincaid, Caleb Johnson, Justin Fields, and Sam Darnold, a couple of new signees who should be starting for their respective teams. We'll find out. Jameson Williams, nice value at 806. 807, Mike Evans, Pearsall at 808. Love that. Mixon, Kamara, Judy, and you have taken Tyrone Church, Pat.
I have, and I'm pretty convinced for a guy who only recently switched from wide receiver to running back. Pretty good season for him. Really, the only check mark against him was sort of with his fumbling issues, but luckily he did not get thrown into fumble jail very long at any point last season, and just his dual ability as a runner and pass catcher, and he looked really explosive last year. So I'm pretty excited about him. Is there a tight end on the board, Jeremy, who's going to tempt me to now that the handcuffs are off?
It is.
Am I going to go for a tight end? I don't think that's where the value is right now. So, yeah, I'm going to lay off there, and I hate to do it, but I'm going to go back to the well at wide receiver, and
Nice.
man, I am
Oh,
going
hang
to
on.
go for it. Was a bit of a disappointing season for him last year, but are we okay?
Yeah, we went
Oh,
over,
wait.
but I'll pick it for you.
Yep, no worries.
Just say it, and I'll let you know.
Jaden Reed, please.
Yep. No worries. All yours. Talk to us a little bit about Reed, especially with Josh Jacobs telling us that the Green Bay Packers need a number one wide receiver.
Yeah, and I don't think Reed is ever going to be the number one receiver, but can be a very good slot guy, complimentary guy, gadget guy. I mean, they like to use him on end arounds too.
Yep.
Just really good with the ball in his hands, and I think they remembered that in the playoffs and started returning to the focus of putting the ball in Jaden Reed's hands. But there was a time when they kind of went away from him last year. It was after Jordan Love came back from his injury. And when Malik Willis was in there, the Packers were sort of forced to run the ball a lot. And they found out that they did it really well. And they
Yeah.
became one of the run heaviest teams in the NFL last year to the detriment of Jaden Reed and some of the other pass catchers there. But I still think he's a really talented player. You know, not a lot of value on the board at wide receiver right now, but
Sure.
he's my fifth wide receiver, and at this point, since the talent level is really thinned out at that position, I'll probably be focusing elsewhere if we were to go on and complete this draft.
Yep. Well, why don't you talk about that a little bit? Because obviously, we'll need a second running back at some point. If this draft were to go on 20 or 30 rounds, well, we've only got 10 rounds here. How are you feeling about this? And what are you thinking position wise? Are you done for a while at wide receiver? Do you want a fortified tight end? With a couple of picks here in the next few, or would you go heavy running back? What's your kind of overall strategy from this point forward?
Yeah, I mean, it would be just sort of patching in at tight end with probably some veteran guys and having that be a focal point of future rookie drafts. And then what I like about this doing startups this year, you really can kick the can down the road at running back,
Yes.
Jeremy, because the rookie class is so strong that I can wait like 4 or 5 more rounds and still be pulling out dudes like, um, Ollie Gordon, Bashal Tootin, Jarquez Hunter, and like have guys who have a chance to be immediate contributors as committee backs because I think they're 15 to 18 running backs in this class
Yeah.
who are immediately going to have fantasy relevant roles this year.
Yep.
Now, it might be kind of hard to identify which 15 to 18, but yeah, I mean, like the top 20 at running back, it's just such an extraordinarily deep running back class that I don't mind waiting in a dynasty startup where you're allowed to take rookies and just hitting the rookie running back class hard in the double digit rounds.
Yeah, I love that. And I do have a question about that, but I'm going to pick very quickly and we'll get back to it. Looking at my board here, I do not have enough wide receivers for my liking, but I'm only stuck with Baker Mayfield in a super flex at quarterback. I'm going to double dip here. I'm going to go old guard with Geno Smith. I think he's got a few more years left than Matthew Stafford, which is the only reason I chose him over Stafford. All the rest of these guys can kick rocks, but then I'm going to take the stab at Jackson Dart and pair the old guard with the young gun. Hopefully these three get it done for me with my presumably stud wide receivers at the top. We will see. But Pat, let's look back at the last few rounds. That's rounds 8 and 9 here. We see Devontae Adams at the 9-11. We see guys like Najee Harris, who found a new home at the 9-5. David Montgomery, who's still doing it at the 9-7. Cortland Sutton, who broke out, in his 7th year in the league last year, and it found consistency at the 9-3. Do you like any of these guys here in the 8th or 9th round as a supreme value?
I thought just from the perspective of getting youthful wide receivers with bright futures, getting Pearsall and Jameson Williams in the 8th round, really good
Love it.
values there. Yeah, I mean, and then if you wanted to go a little older, like Sutton, a guy who's obviously like at peak right now and coming off a really nice year. I liked your Loveland pick a lot. If he had made it back to me somehow, I would have jumped on him.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's still some pretty impressive value here. Jalen McMillan. I know it was sort of a bummer for the Jalen McMillan enthusiasts to have Chris Godwin re-sign with the Buccaneers, but McMillan still has a long career runway. So eventually, Mike Evans starting to get up there in years. Like, he's not going to be the third wheel forever. So
Agree.
pretty good value with McMillan in the 9th.
Agree. And just so you know, Pat, you're on auto pick. I think you need to fix that before your last pick, which I assume will be a tight end, but maybe not. What are you thinking here with your last pick for this draft?
Yeah, not necessarily a tight end, Jeremy. We'll see.
Yeah.
I might have to find that second running back before I do anything else. So
I love
we'll
it.
see.
As we await your final pick, we see Trey Harris go off the board at the 10:02. Matt Stafford, of course, should have another productive season. Tony Pollard at the 10:04. Maybe he's the guy again in Tennessee. It doesn't seem like Tajay Spears wants to take over that role. Tucker Kraft at the 10:05. Many people love Tucker Kraft. I'm not sure about him. It's purely situation. The talent seems to be there. We have Milroe, Cousins, Khalil Shakir, who just got the bag, if you want to call it that, in Buffalo. Kyle Pitts. The value on Kyle Pitts is ridiculous if he becomes something. Please, at this point, I think you have to invest. Then we have James Conner, who I love for another season, DeAndre Swift, who we already talked about, and Isaiah Pacheco. Pat, what are you thinking about Isaiah Pacheco?
Pacheco's value has kind of crashed in the dynasty market, but the dude was trying to play through a broken leg last year. He came back. He had a fractured leg, came back, and not surprisingly wasn't quite himself. But we saw how dynamic and impactful he was in his rookie year. I'm optimistic he's going to get back to being that kind of player. And, I think that's value to get him with pick 120 at this point. So, even though a lot of rookies I like, and I just think Pacheco, a guy who's already shown what he can do and that he can be a top 15 running back. I just think we're going to see the real Isaiah Pacheco after a season where he was obviously playing at less than 100%.
Yeah, I agree with you. I love Pacheco there. Elijah Mitchell isn't scaring me off. Whatever else they have. The only thing that could scare me off, of course, as you referenced, was what the Kansas City Chiefs decide to do in the draft. Question for you, though, regarding this running back draft class. We hear that it's an amazing draft class. It's super strong. It's super deep. We're very happy with the top end talent. We're very happy with kind of the glut of guys from RB5 to RB20 who are roughly the same guy, more or less. But these guys are going to come in. They're going to take portions of the backfield potentially right away. But I'm not going to call it a deep dive. It was a shallow dive into the running back draft classes of the last 8 years. And I have a question for you. In rounds 5, 6, or 7, so this does not include UDFAs. There's a couple names in there like Austin Eckler. But in rounds 5, 6, and 7, can you name the only running back in the last 8 years that was drafted there to have a sustained, successful career?
5, 6, and 7. Man, I'm drawing a big blank here. Of the last 7, 8 years.
Yeah, so it was actually in year 8. It was in 2017. There were 2 running backs drafted in rounds 5. I think one in round 5 and one in round 7, who looked like they were good, but one succumbed to injury, cut his career very short. The other one still playing today.
Boy, I don't want this to be bad live streaming here, Jeremy, but I'm not going to be able to pull this. I'm not going to be able to pull this name off the top of my head. So hit me.
The reason I ask you this is because it's so hard, I think, beyond round 5 in the NFL draft, and we've seen this bear out, to actually find a guy who matters. So that name is Aaron Jones. He was drafted in the 5th round in 2017. He certainly wasn't a workhorse back, right? He's got a little more tread on his tires than a running back at age 30 should have. The other guy in round 7 was Chris Carson. We saw what happened to him because he was overworked and because of his injury history. And he looked like he was going to be a great back, but career was cut short. But my point is to you, Pat, is that it doesn't seem to bear out. We're going to have a lot of these backs taken in the draft in rounds 5, 6, and 7. We're already excited about the Bayshell Tutons who, could be a round 5 guy, could be a round 4 guy. And some of these other names, RJ Harvey, does he go in the 3rd, 4th? Does he find his way to the 5th? But if a running back goes in the 5th round or beyond, I'm going to be a little bit scared off of them just because of this historical trend.
Generally, 5th to 7th round running backs are poor investments for Dynasty, Jeremy. But you mentioned the 2017 class, and I'm mad at myself for not getting Aaron Jones, considering I'm a Packers fan. But 2017 was a landmark running back class.
Yes, it was.
This is the best running back class since 2017. Yep. And I think because of the depth of this class, we are going to see some really talented guys fall to the back. And that includes guys like one guy who I think is going to go in like the 6th or 7th round, or possibly even undrafted. And I don't want to make the mistake that I've already made with Kyron Williams and Bucky Irving and dismissing smaller backs who don't clock very well in the 40 at the combine. Okay. Kyle Monangai of Rutgers, who's like 5'9" and ran kind of a disappointing 40 time. Also didn't catch a lot of passes in college. That was just sort of the Rutgers offense, but this guy is an absolute warrior when he runs. And he's going to be my guy. I'm going to remember what I saw from him at Rutgers rather than getting hung up on the measurables.
Yeah, I hear you. And I will qualify that in 2017, 30 running backs were taken in the draft, by far the most in the last 8 years. I think the next highest was 25 running backs. And then in 2000, I believe it was 2017, could have been 2018, but Austin Eckler was a UDFA. There were a couple of other UDFAs who made sense in that year. So certainly when you're talking about historic classes like we seem to have here, we might be able to stretch that, that imaginary line, arbitrary line of the 5th round a little bit further. Let's have a look here at the draft, Pat. Number 1, how are you feeling about your build here, especially in the fact that we prevented you from taking a tight end?
Yeah. And I know, to not take a tight end in the first 10 rounds of a tight end premium draft, could be considered dubious strategy, but at the same time, tight end premium tends to, push up the tight ends way up and sometimes maybe a little too early, and it presents value at other positions. Sure. So that's kind of been a thing of mine, like Scott Fishbowl for redraft and some of these tight end premium startup drafts. I am more inclined to fade tight end in a tight end premium thing just because of the value you get at other positions. So, and look, like there's still some tight ends, young and old, who I like. Travis Kelce hasn't gone in there. Like if Travis Kelce were around for me in the next one and I decide I think I could conceivably contend with this team in 2025, sure, I'll take Travis Kelce for one more year. Plus some other young guys. Cole Kmet still on the board. He'd certainly be a guy I would look at with my next couple of picks. So, I'm not too worried about getting totally hung out to dry. Isaiah Likely, a guy who, if he's ever decoupled from Mark Andrews, could potentially be a tight end 1. So not too worried about waiting. And I'm sure I would probably double tap that position with one of these next pairs of picks I have.
Yeah, and the tight end 4 from last season, Jonnu Smith, still there. We'll have to see what happens with these offensive schemes. But we heard all offseason at the beginning of the year, too high safety. We had Andrew Cooper on the show last week as well, who was talking to us about defenses having rules. So whereas, yes, they're playing zone or they're playing man, it depends what the offense is doing, where these defenders are smarter. These schemes on defense are more flexible in terms of in-play design, and that kind of creates advantages for the defense. And my point there is that we're seeing guys like Tyreek Hill, these big play specialists. They're not getting the ball deep downfield. Mike McDaniel switched to Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane and ran his offense that way, as opposed to Tyreek Hill, healthy or not, and Jalen Waddle. So we're seeing this across the league. Do you think that defenses are going to continue to take away some of these explosive playmakers, or will we just see more Jameson Williams who can catch the ball and run for 50 yards?
Yeah, that's a good question about the macro trends. It seems like in the constant chess game between offense and defense, like the offense kind of has adjusted to the deep safeties, and we have seen more frequent and more effective running of the football lately. And I remember it seemed like a lot of people on fantasy Twitter 8 years ago, as passing kind of hit its peak as far as like percentage of passing plays on offense. You almost got the attitude that people thought it was stupid to run the ball because like it was just poor EV relative to passing. But as the defense started to adjust to that and take away the deep shots, it became or has become more effective to run the ball. So I think eventually maybe that's going to start pulling those safeties down a little bit to not let teams chip away at you with the running game and with the short passes. We'll see. But you make the point about Miami. There might have been more to it at that. There might have been to a protection scheme too, where they didn't want him taking as many deep drops. And so, but yeah, who would have thought that Jonnu Smith would turn out to be as effective, if not more effective a weapon than Tyreek Hill last year.
Crazy.
So it's great about fantasy football. You never can predict some of the things that are going to happen like that.
Unbelievable. Just to kind of, again, this was a tight end premium, so only 12 tight ends off the board. Likely you mentioned Ingram is a guy who's looking for a new home. Freiermuth I don't love, but we'll see what happens there and who his quarterback is. And then Cade Otton, of course, with Baker Mayfield, I'm definitely looking at Cade Otton later in the draft. A couple of quick notes. Cooper Kupp officially released during the show. Any thoughts about where he could or should land?
Oh boy. It's just not a good sign that the Rams just so quickly soured on him, and really like his production just cratered late last year. So if he wants to come back, he might have to do it on a I don't know about veterans minimum, but he's not going to be making enormous bank, I would say, with whoever he signs with. Man, who does need a slot receiver off the top of my head? Like someone who's, I guess you could say, oh, go ahead.
Maybe a Vegas opposite Jacoby and Bowers. I don't know if they can fit all three of them on the field, but that's I guess a possibility. Patriots can always use them.
Yeah, Patriots, and it might not be bad to have a veteran presence for Drake May. That actually probably makes as much sense as anyone else I can think of.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. I can't think of a ton at the moment. He should probably end up going to, we're not going to put him on the Titans. He could go to someone that's at least contending for a playoff spot this season. So we'll see. Mike T says, please come to Green Bay. There's your potential wide receiver one if he's healthy. Jamie says maybe the Ravens. We'll see, but the Ravens just took DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know if any team can sustain a D-Hop Cooper Kupp, veteran wide receiver room, especially with the other options they have and Lamar not throwing it to any of them. So we'll see where he lands. But breaking news on the show, Kupp released. Hey, it is what it is. Pat, I'm going to put you on the spot, and this will be the last question that we have for you. So looking at your team and my team, we built them the way that we could. But of the remaining teams here, is there any one that just sticks out to you that you personally like?
Yeah, I mean, team two, since team two did keep snaking me in the even numbered rounds.
Nice.
Shout out getting Drake May with the 23rd overall pick and pairing him with Lamar. I love that.
Yeah.
took Hampton away from me in the 4th round. So yeah, I also got Quinshon Judkins, like having that youthful build at running back. I like, and let's see, I'm just looking at the wide receivers, Burden, Golden. Yeah, also pretty young. It's a young approach, but that's kind of the way I like to draft too, with sort of a win in year 2 approach.
Yes.
And it just sort of felt like team 2 was my spirit animal here.
And agree, and serendipitous that the guy with the handle Angriest Dragon, given all of our Game of Thrones chat at the beginning, was the one to draft next to you and snipe you a number of times. If I'm looking at the board here, Jeremy from Twitter always has some interesting teams and some really good teams. Jefferson, Genty, Hall. I like the value of Hall this offseason. Christian McCaffrey, Xavier Worthy, who I think is a value. We'll see what happens with him. But Henry, Mike Evans, and then some of the later quarterbacks. I'm a little concerned about those QBs, but I like that team. And then how could you not like Saucy B? I don't have your complete handle there, but Jordan Love, Trevor, and then Sam Darnold. You got Rashee Rice, Nakua, CeeDee Lamb, Emeka Egbuka. You got some running backs there with Chuba as well. So a couple of really good teams here. And Kingpin Karen right there, the Green Bay fan, Pat, drafting from the 109. Other than Mahomes, not my favorite pick there, but Amon-Ra, Garrett Wilson, Laporta, Devonta Smith, DJ Moore, Travis Hunter. Whoa.
Yeah,
I absolutely love those teams in the middle.
I was going to say about Kingpin Karen at 9. Sometimes if you wait a little on that second quarterback, you can actually get really good value. And getting Shadeur that late, like I like Shadeur more than Cam Ward in this draft.
Okay.
Like, and I actually think Shadeur is a better prospect than he's getting credit for. I am very pro Shadeur, and that team built kind of the way I like to kick running back down the road a little bit, be really strong at wide receiver, and take advantage of some of the falling value you can get at quarterback if you're willing to wait on that second quarterback. And she waited and got, a pretty good second and third quarterback.
Yep. Yeah, I love it. And I think Shadeur may be suffering from Lamar Ball disease, where LaMelo is a great player, but, everyone kind of had the stink of their father on them. Deion Sanders, I don't think deserves that stink, but he's probably a little bit more involved than everybody really wants him to be.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. And, people can kind of knock Shadeur, and I know he comes off as a little bit cocky sometimes, but like, think of the pressure this dude's been dealing with as the son of Deion, even going back to Jackson State. You wouldn't think a Jackson State quarterback would have all that much pressure on him, but like being the son of Deion has, put the Klieg lights on Shadeur for the last 3 or 4 years. And I think he's handled it pretty well, all things considered.
For sure. Totally agree with you. Oh, I lied. We have one more question, but it should be a very quick one. Kincaid, in or out?
Oh man. I thought it was so set up so well for him last year, and it was just disappointing. So not totally giving up hope, but I'm a lot less optimistic than I was a year ago.
Yeah, hard to argue that point, especially Khalil Shakir. They're paying him money. We still got Keon Coleman there. Who did they just bring in yesterday at wide receiver?
Oh, it was Josh Palmer.
Yep, Josh Palmer. So again, just, probably as good as Dalton Kincaid. So we'll see what happens. Josh Allen's going to run all over the yard anyway. He doesn't need anyone but James Cook and a slot. So Khalil is already entrenched there. We will see if Dalton Kincaid can do it. So thank you from Heart Jess M. Thanks to Pat, Spirit Animal. Thank you, Pat, for coming onto the show. We really appreciate you here. We are Adjust the Ranks. Thank you so much for showing up and joining us, participating in our Dynasty mock draft. We are here all off season long mock drafting. We have Derek Brown on the show next Wednesday, 2 Wednesdays from now, Kevin Coleman, a bunch of other guests already booked in through April and May and beyond. We will be here mock drafting at least weekly throughout the off season. We have a rookie draft coming up next week, so please join us for that. You, of course, know Pat Fitzmaurice, but Pat, just in case people can't read all the amazing backdrop, which I love, behind you, where can people find you in their work if they've been living under a rock for the last 10 years?
Jeremy, thank you so much for having me. And people can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Fitz_FF. And go to fantasypros.com, and we've got you covered for free agency, the draft, dynasty, redraft, whatever you're into. We do fantasy football 365 days a year, all around the clock. So yeah, hit us up at fantasypros.com.
Awesome. Thanks again, Pat. We really appreciate you joining us. This has been Adjust the Ranks. We are a part of the fantasy football universe. You can follow us over there on Twitter or on TikTok or on YouTube. Please help us grow this channel. And thank you for stopping by. So for Pat, I am Jeremy. If I can find the button, which I can never find the button, Pat, I will end the show, and we will see you guys next time.
Adjust the Ranks is most obliged to your patronage. Should you wish to imbibe future content via your auditory and/or ocular cavities, do offer your clicks of approval and subscription.